Along the shores of the Indian Ocean, where the scent of cloves lingers and the soft whispers of the sea breeze fill the air, lies a history that cannot be erased, a history of pain, suffering, and the struggle for human dignity. This is Zanzibar. Sun-scorched history, a place of postcard markets and narrow winding alleys. But what it doesn't display is the weight of its chains, the silence buried beneath coral stone, the shadows that linger even in daylight. As you walk through the streets of Stone Town, you see carved wooden doors, children laughing, fishermen drying their nets. But beneath it all lies a forgotten wound. This is not just a paradise, it is a graveyard of memory. A place where human beings were once sold like objects, tortured and silenced. But this story isn't only about the chains, it's about those who endured them, and the slow, painful yet beautiful journey from slavery to freedom. Zanzibar was never just a dot on the map. It was the beating heart of a human empire, a place where goods passed through, but so did people. People who were turned into commodities, measured not by their dignity, but by their weight, their strength, their price in the marketplace. From distant inland regions, Tabora, Kigoma, even as far as the Congo, men, women, and children were violently captured, taken by local traders or those working with foreign buyers. They were marched on foot for weeks without enough food, without water, and without mercy. Many died along the way. Those who made it arrived broken, in body and spirit, mere shadows of who they once were. They were branded with hot irons, on their cheeks, on their chests, marked not as people, but as property. These people were not seen as human. They were handled like freight, like market goods, like currency powering the luxury of empire. Bodies with a price, souls without rights, and dreams crushed before they ever had the chance to grow. And dreams crushed before they ever had the chance to grow. Imagine this very market square today, now filled with the sounds of fruit sellers, basket weavers, street musicians, was once a site of deep suffering, not a place of fair trade, but a place of public pain. It was here that families were torn apart, where people sat for hours under the burning sun, waiting to be sold like livestock. Chains rang out on these coral stones, and blood soaked into the cracks beneath the feet of those who were not free. The slave market operated right here, just steps from where today tourists buy souvenirs, paintings, and carvings. The contrast is vast, but the ground has not forgotten. These coral walls hold memory. The stones do not speak, but they know. Their memory may be faint, but it is not lost. The spirits of those who passed through still ride the breeze that rolls in from the sea.
Yes, this is inside the chamber that used to be used during the era of the Sultan's slave trade. These are the chambers that were called slave chambers, where slaves were kept and hidden during those centuries in Zanzibar, before Zanzibar gained its independence. As you can see, our slaves used to sit in this area and were chained with these chains.
We walk slowly into the Anglican Cathedral, a stone structure standing in quiet dignity, with high vaulted ceilings and sunlight streaming through stained glass windows adorned with religious scenes. It is a sanctuary now, a place of worship, reflection, and peace. But beneath this present-day beauty lies a hidden, heavy history. This cathedral was built directly atop what was once a bustling slave market. Beneath the altar, the very place where worshipers today bow in humility before God, were once chambers of suffering, dark rooms, cold, cramped, filled with bodies in the silent weight of anguish. Inside those walls were stone cells without ventilation, without light. These were the holding rooms for men, women, and children, captured, sold, and stripped of their right to freedom. Some waited there for several days, anticipating their auction. Others remained for weeks, sleeping on cold earth, with little food and no hope. And many simply did not survive. They died right there in the shadows. This ground still bears witness, silently yet powerfully. Each stone, each crevice, carries a story of pain and cruelty from centuries past. Where once stood the whipping post, where captives were beaten before crowds, today a cross stands, a symbol of transformation, from suffering to forgiveness, from evil to redemption. Where punishment was once displayed, now stands a testament of faith. It is a living witness of history's turning point and a call to remember. Christian missionaries who arrived after the abolition of the slave trade built this cathedral with two purposes: to preach the Word of God and to preserve the memory of suffering so that future generations would not forget, so that the world would never repeat it. There are visitors who come here eager to learn, but when they descend into these ancient chambers, they weep silently. Some are left speechless. Their silence speaks louder than words, a silence heavier than sound. The pain here is not only recorded in history books, it is etched into these walls, into the stone floor, and into the souls of those who pass through.
My name is Godwin. I am an expert in history, cultural heritage, and tourism. I am here at the Christ Church Cathedral, also known as the Old Slave Market. The question is, what role does the church play in preserving the memory of the history of slavery? Now, when we talk about the church here in Zanzibar, we are specifically referring to the Anglican Church. Is there a contribution, and what is their contribution? First of all, to understand the contribution, we go back to the 1800s, specifically from 1870, and from 1864, when missionaries known as Amka arrived in Zanzibar with two main objectives. First, they decided to make positive efforts in the overall issue of abolishing and ending the slave trade. And since the trade was deeply rooted and entrenched, they themselves could not stand alone and stop the trade, considering that the island was ruled by Arab Omanis. So what they did for a long time was to buy slaves and set them free. And that community of freed slaves, they believe, were then provided with education, housing, food, almost all the basic necessities. So we see, first and foremost, the church as a church, meaning those missionaries who came, the church built a church right on top of the slave market here in Zanzibar. We begin to see that the first contribution, according to the records, because that was the first church, was to make efforts to prevent, reduce, and eradicate slavery. But also, if we carefully look at those very same years, the Christian missionaries who, as we've previously stated, truly represented the church during that significant historical period, began to actively try to completely erase the deeply negative public image of the slave trade. You can see there are buildings or structures located in these areas around the Anglican Mkunazini Church in Zanzibar. For example, the place where the slave market used to be is exactly where the Mkunazini Christian Cathedral was built. The area that had underground tunnels below where slaves were hidden and kept. Because you find that on top, what did the missionaries build? They built a missionary hospital or dispensary, which is a building that today we use as a hostel. So you can see how, in that way, the church contributed to history or to commemorating the slave trade. First, they tried to abolish it, but they also tried at least to cover up or patch over some of the wounds. The aim was to erase history, but many slaves who remained were freed after being bought by missionaries and set free, and they stayed here. Now, if we look at things from a psychological perspective, there are things called trauma, right? Because trauma means that within trauma, there are things called triggers. That is something that when you see it, notice it, or feel it, it takes you back to a bad memory that causes a person to experience trauma, to be traumatized. So they tried to cover up some of those signs that would have been bad triggers for the locals who had experienced those conditions of slavery. Coming to the present years, we also see a lot of efforts by the church in commemorating the slave trade. First of all, with the efforts of the church in collaboration with the government every year. I think starting from last year, every year on the 6th of June, the church joins with the government to commemorate the International Day for the Abolition of Slavery. I think the first time was last year when the retired Archbishop of Canterbury, Mr. Justin Welby, came, and in some of the speeches by the Archbishop of the Anglican Church of Tanzania, made a request. It was a proposal suggested by Christians that a day be set aside to remember the slave trade. So it was a speech delivered before the president, and it was well received. That was the first instance. Secondly, we have a history that is being preserved. I think all of you can bear witness, especially residents of Zanzibar. Thousands of visitors come from all over the world. From every corner of the globe, they arrive every day to come and learn about the history. And the church has trained experts in history, experts in guiding tourists, and they're teaching people. But also the Anglican Church, in collaboration with the Zanzibar opposition government and the World Monument Fund, created an exhibition, a display room. It was in the year 2016 when it was officially opened and inaugurated, where there are photos and explanations about the slave trade from the 1800s up to the year 1909. Not only that, but the church also serves as a truly practical training ground for students who are diligently studying history and its profound impact, especially those who are more focused on the history of the slave trade. Every year, the Anglican Church of Tanzania, specifically the Anglican Church of Zanzibar at Mkunazini, receives students from the University of Dar es Salaam. According to the records, their number ranges from 5, 6 and upwards. These are students who come to do practical training. So after being taught in the classroom, history and everything, they come here to learn through practical experience. It was those field sessions, the ones we call field work, right? After the theory, you do field work, practical training. I believe I am also one of the products of this student. I was in my second year at the University of Dar es Salaam. And from the University of Dar es Salaam, I came here to do my practical training. And it really broadened my understanding of how the slave trade operates. Because the way we learn it in class, the main emphasis is on the triangular slave trade, the one that took place from West Africa to America and other European countries. But we were not taught about our own, the one that concerns us here. It was only touched upon, not taught in depth. And even most visitors who come here do not know much about the East African slave trade. They only know about the triangular or transatlantic slave trade. So I think that is just part of the church's contribution to the remembrance of the slave trade. I believe that if we dig deeper and deeper, we might discover even more contributions.
From the quiet stillness of the cathedral, we slowly make our way toward the shores of the Indian Ocean. This ocean, deep, blue, and endless, is today a symbol of beauty and freedom of travel. But centuries ago, it was a passage of pain, a route not walked by choice. Dhow ships, doomed with towering sails and wooden hulls driven by the trade winds, carried precious cargo like cloves and cinnamon to the Middle East and Asia. But beneath the cargo deck, in airless darkness, they also carried human beings, men, women, and children, turned into merchandise. Men were bound in chains, lying on wooden planks soaked with sweat, blood, and exhaustion. Children were torn from their mothers' arms, their eyes filled with terror for a journey they could not understand. Some collapsed from thirst. Others died along the way, their bodies cast into the sea like cargo deemed no longer valuable. Their names were never written down. Their voices were never heard again. But the sea has not forgotten. Each wave is a whisper of history. Each tide that reaches the shore is a testimony to what once was. This sea, though calm today, was once a prison without walls, and at times, a grave without a name. These blue waters shimmer beneath today's sunlight, but beneath this tranquil surface, they carry stories long submerged, stories of suffering, stories of loss, but also stories that bear witness to what humanity must remember and never repeat. We now stand at the heart of Derajani Market, a place alive with movement, colors of fruits and katang fabrics, the scent of spices drifting from every corner, the shouts of vendors calling out their prices, laughter mingling with haggling voices, children darting through the crowd, people brushing past in a hurry. It's everyday life. But beneath these sounds and smiles, there is another silence, a silence of forgotten history, or perhaps history hidden on purpose. It's ordinary life, but beneath the noise and beneath these smiles, there is another silence, a silence of a forgotten history, or perhaps one that was hidden on purpose. This street where we now stand, Mkunazini, was once a place of suffering. There were chains here. People were bound, forced to bow. Their bodies were turned into commodities. Their dreams were denied. Today, the same street is lined with tomato sellers, women chatting about fish prices, people waiting for the dala, sipping morning porridge. But the ghosts of yesterday still walk here. We don't see them, but they pass through. They witness silently. In 1873, under pressure from the British, Zanzibar declared the abolition of slavery. But did it truly end? No, it slipped into the shadows. It wore a new face, took on new names, but the pain remained the same. The slave markets were closed, but the homes of the wealthy filled with servants. What was once an open trade became a quiet system. Domestic servitude, without contracts, without wages, without freedom. The cries were silence, swallowed by the walls of houses and buried deep within the hearts of those who lived in that silence.
What we learned in this tour, it's actually the whole history about the East African place and mainly the Zanzibar island, how it was formed, how the slaves were kept, how they were mainly tortured, and how the slave market was abolished in the 1873s. Mainly that.
Our history has layers. It wears a face of joy, but casts a shadow of pain. Some of it is written in books, but much of it is hidden in walls, in the names of our streets, in the memories passed down through families. And sometimes that history is not far away. It is right here in front of us. It is visible yet unseen. It is free yet locked inside the silence of forgetting. This is also Zanzibar, the same island, but its silence is no longer the same. History cannot be erased, but it can be faced, it can be taught, it can be honored, from slavery to struggle to freedom that is still growing, like coral, slow, layered, and strong. This island still carries pain, but it also carries possibility. And in every child's laughter, every step on the coral stones, the past walks alongside the present, whispering, never forget.